They say that the heart is the center of life, but nobody wants that it is also its most vulnerable point. Everything you feel, everything that moves you, can be used against you. It was precisely this truth that inspired one of the most ruthless mental training methods in history, as Machiavelli trained to feel nothing and win everything. However, this is not just his story, it is a guide for you, because at the end of this path, you will also know how to feel nothing and win everything, not to become stone, but to become someone that nobody can manipulate. In a world where everyone reacts, you will learn to remain still. Where others are disarmed by impulse, you will become impenetrable. Because the secret is not to feel less, but to feel with surgical precision. Machi, the one who dominates his emotion, dominates the entire board, and you are about to do the same. Every word you hear in this story will be a piece of training that transforms weakness into advantage, fear into strategy, pain into silent power. It's not about escaping emotional chaos, but using it as fuel, not fleeing from your shadows, but making them work for you. Because only those who control their internal world end up controlling the external one. Most people fear facing themselves. They are afraid of their shadow, their contradictions, their capacity to destroy or manipulate, but that's the point that keeps them weak. True control begins when you dare to look at what you have always avoided. In every defensive gesture, the other person betrays themselves, and you, from your center, read everything without saying a word. This is how true psychological power is born. When your mind no longer dances to the rhythm of external stimuli, when the world screams and you choose silence, when everyone reacts and you remain in stillness, it's not passivity, it's mastery. Whoever controls their emotional energy controls the narrative, and whoever controls the narrative has already won without moving. There's a point in training where silence ceases to be resistance and becomes language. You start to notice how others fill the voids you create. They hurry you, provoke you, demand a response, and you just observe. The void becomes a mirror, and each person projects their anxiety, guilt, and desire. Your silence forces them to confront their own disorder, and that's where you discover a brutal truth. Most people can't stand silence because it reveals what they are. You don't need to demonstrate power. You embody it. Your words become rare, your gestures minimal, but every action carries intention. You learn to speak less, to look more, to move when no one expects it. Mystery becomes your shield and your weapon. And in that contained space, a form of respect is born that isn't requested, it's imposed. People start to correct themselves around you, to measure their words, to reconsider their movements, not because you control them, but because you disconcert them. They no longer know how to read you. That's the beginning of invisible mastery, the power of someone who doesn't react but sees everything. The next level is deeper. It's not enough to control the reaction. You have to reprogram the meaning. What used to hurt now teaches. What used to humiliate now strengthens. Every emotion becomes data, every experience a lesson. You start to understand that the real enemy wasn't the one who manipulated you, but the one who managed to manipulate yourself. Emotions are the language of the unconscious, and if you don't learn to translate them, you will live as a victim of your own interpretations. The shadow you feared becomes your map, showing you your weak points, your hidden needs, your unresolved desires, and when you understand them, no one can use them against you. This process isn't repression, it's alchemy. You transform what used to break you into material for strength. Every dark thought, every wound, every impulse is integrated. You no longer fight what you feel, you use it. And when you get there, when you master the invisible, the unconscious stops sabotaging you and starts serving you. Emotional mastery doesn't distance you from the world. It returns you to the world, But in control, you start to notice what others don't see, the microgestures, the tones, the patterns. You understand that almost no one speaks with sincerity. Everyone communicates from need. Some seek approval, others power, others refuge. You, on the other hand, no longer seek, no longer beg, no longer give away emotional information. Every word you say is calculated. Every silence has a purpose. And while they wear themselves out trying to understand you, you study them in silence. True psychological power isn't shown, it's felt. And when you reach that point, everything changes. People behave differently around you. Manipulators get confused. Dominants retreat. You become a territory that no one can invade. It's there that you understand what Machiavelli discovered centuries ago. The most dangerous power isn't the one that imposes itself, but the one that remains still while everything crumbles around it. There's a moment in the process when solitude becomes your laboratory. You sit in front of silence, and you feel the whole world turn off. There are no more distractions, no more masks, just you and your naked thoughts. At first, that stillness is unbearable. The mind tries to fill it with noise, with memories, with ghosts. But if you resist, something different happens. You start to listen to the truth you've been avoiding. You discover that your emotions aren't enemies, they're a part of you. And when you understand that, you are in control. And that's where the real power begins. What you repress, what you hide, what you deny, that's what governs you. The first step towards mastery is not calmness, it's confrontation. You can't control what you don't recognize. You can't dominate what you fear feeling. The emotional world doesn't turn off with willpower, it transforms with understanding. And this process hurts because it forces you to discover that you weren't as free as you thought. From a young age, we were taught to react, to defend ourselves when hurt, to speak when accused, to explain when doubted. But every immediate reaction is an open door to control. Whoever dominates your impulse dominates your mind, and whoever dominates your mind no longer needs to touch you to direct you. This training is not a game, it's a silent dismantling of all your automatic responses. Every emotion has a root, a story, a function. It's not about eliminating anger, fear, or sadness, but understanding what purpose they serve and who they serve when they appear. If you are not the one who directs them, someone else will. The modern world doesn't need chains, it uses screens. It doesn't need prisons, it uses emotions. They make you believe that feeling everything is a sign of humanity, when in reality, it's a sign of vulnerability. Those who don't control their emotions are easy to distract, easy to divide, easy to use. The next step is simple, but brutal. Observing without reacting. That's where real training begins. When something hurts you and you choose silence, instead of compasses distorted by fear, anger shows you where you feel powerless. Sadness indicates what you still don't accept, and guilt only appears when you surrender your power to others. What you called weakness was simply misinterpreted information. Inner training is not about feeling less, but feeling with awareness. You learn to look at each emotion with surgical distance, no longer dragged by it. You observe it, no longer controlled by it. You study it. This constant observation separates you from chaos, and in this state, the mind becomes sharp as a blade. You start to anticipate others' moves without needing to guess them, not because you read minds, but because you read your own. Whoever understands themselves understands the entire world. It's at this moment that psychological mastery ceases to be a concept and becomes presence. Your body calms down, your breathing aligns, your energy stabilizes, and you start to feel a kind of silent, non-aggressive, yet unbreakable power. Interestingly, people perceive this without you saying a word. They start to look at you differently. sensing something they can't quite name, a mix of calmness and danger. They don't understand that what they feel is your internal control. You no longer seek to win arguments. You don't need to convince anyone. The most powerful influence is born from balance. People don't follow the one who shouts, they follow the one who remains unruffled. And that's when you understand why external chaos was never your enemy, just a reflection of your internal disorder. When the inside is ordered, the world responds, everything starts to turn in your favor, not because you fight, but because you fit in. The universe naturally tends towards balance, and you've become it. There's a point where the temptation to feel intensely again reappears. Your mind tells you, relax, you've learned. But the real challenge begins there, maintaining equanimity when everything seems to have stabilized. That's the last trap, the ego's return. You will believe yourself invincible, and that feeling can be your downfall because mastery isn't sustained with pride, but with attention. If you stop observing, if you let yourself be carried away by the need to demonstrate power, you lose everything. Control is based on the humility to accept that you can still fall. The mind loves drama, the soul loves silence. Each time you feel the urge to react, remember that's the battlefield. And if you can remain still there, you've already won. This state of mastery doesn't isolate you from the world. On the contrary, it gives you the freedom to interact without getting lost. You start to choose your battles, your words, your bonds. You no longer approach from need, but from clarity. People feel your energy before you speak. They perceive in you something they don't quite understand, as if your emotions had a different weight. You don't rush. You don't justify yourself. You don't beg for understanding. You simply exist with purpose. And while everyone rushes to be understood, you choose to understand. While they seek attention, you choose distance. While they shout for love, you choose calmness, because you understand something that few discover. Whoever possesses themselves doesn't need to possess anything else. That's the true victory, not the conquest of the other, but the conquest of your interior, not the control of others, but mastery over your mind. And when you get there, there's no power that can touch you. You've seen too much. You've felt the weight of your own unconscious. You've touched your shadow. And now you understand that true mastery isn't in control, but in integration. What you once denied, you now recognize. What shamed you now gives you power. You discover that your darkness wasn't an enemy. When something tempts you and you choose distance, when something provokes you and you choose stillness, that moment is pure power. Those who manage to sustain it begin to become invisible to manipulation. Something curious starts to happen when you learn not to react. People get uneasy. Those who could read you before no longer know how to do it. Your calmness becomes a mirror, and each person starts to face their own reflection. They blame you for being cold, distant, mysterious, but in reality, what they feel is fear. Fear of not being able to access you. When you dominate your emotions, you don't need to raise your voice. Control is perceived. It's a sensation that floats in the air, that imposes presence without needing to impose itself. What was once impulse is now strategy. What was once a wound is now controlled territory. And while others try to guess your intentions, you simply observe, not to manipulate, but to understand. You start to realize that serenity is not coldness, but rather focus, not about eliminating emotions, but directing them like an electric current that only you know when to activate. This is the difference between those who live reacting and those who live choosing. Each time you choose, your mind expands a bit more. The world remains the same, but you are no longer the same. Words that previously hurt you now sound distant. Looks that intimidated you no longer touch you. You have created an invisible barrier, not of indifference, but of lucidity. Pain does not disappear, but ceases to have power over you. In this state, something within you aligns. The body, mind, and shadow begin to speak the same language. There is no longer internal war, just silent observation. Transformation becomes evident. You no longer fight against your emotions, you use them as tools. Anger becomes measured impulse, sadness becomes introspection, fear becomes strategic alert. You have turned internal disorder into a system of invisible power. Most people fear this phase because it is the point where you detach from human noise. You are no longer moved by the need for approval or the game of appearances. You become a spectator of the social theater, and everything that previously affected you now seems like a rehearsed play. That is where the true manipulation begins, within, with control over your own reactions. Those who do not dominate their unconscious obey without knowing it. But those who understand it free themselves from any external authority. And that inner freedom is so strange that many confuse it with coldness. But it is not coldness, it is clean power, without the need for demonstration. You now understand that self-control is not a destination, but a state that is renewed with each decision. Each time you choose not to react, each time you remain serene in the face of chaos, you reaffirm your dominion. The human mind is volatile, but you have learned to be an anchor. You start to notice that your environment changes without you doing anything. People can no longer manipulate you with guilt or praise. Pressures lose their effect. Provocations become noise. You have crossed the border between emotion and consciousness. At this point, victory is no longer felt like triumph, but like silence. A silence so deep that it makes you uncomfortable, but it liberates, because that emptiness is not absence, it is space, and only in that space can you create your own destiny, without the threads of the past, without the voice of others in your mind. Your power now is not felt like a shout, but like a presence. It does not convince, it imposes itself. It does not seek, it attracts. You have entered the terrain of those who no longer need to demonstrate anything. It is there that you discover the true purpose of training, not to eliminate emotion, but to understand its structure. Those who understand passions understand strategies. But what few understood is that the study of power was also a study of the soul. The human shadow, he said, should not be denied, but used with intelligence, because absolute control is not achieved by dominating others, but by knowing the depths of oneself. That is the alchemy that transforms suffering into strategy, the wound into wisdom, the loss into autonomy. Now you embody that teaching. You are no longer a slave to impulse or a victim of desire. You have learned to stand while others fall. You have understood that feeling without losing control is not weakness, but mastery. And when you achieve it, the world looks at you differently. They do not know what changed in you, but they feel it. When you reach this point, the world ceases to be a threat and becomes a board. Each situation has its rhythm, each person their role, each word its purpose. And you, from your new consciousness, choose when to move and when to disappear. You have learned that power is not in imposing yourself. You no longer rely on applause, recognition, or even results, having learned that winning isn't always about conquering, but sometimes about waiting. As the one who can wait without anxiety already dominates the one who can't, a type of control the modern noise will never understand. Outside, everyone rushes to feel something, whereas you have mastered the art of not being dragged by anything, turning your silence into a language and your calm into a weapon. And most importantly, you no longer deceive yourself, knowing what you are and what you won't be again. A trained soul doesn't seek to destroy others, but to avoid being destroyed by itself, highlighting the difference between the manipulator and the self-aware individual. The manipulator acts out of fear, while the conscious being acts from a place of control. You start to realize not everyone deserves access to your inner world, as some can't sustain your energy, with certain individuals arriving to test your limits and others to reveal your lessons, and you, in silence, decide what to allow and what to let go. Sometimes, not saying anything is the most powerful act, not out of coldness, but out of respect for what you've built. True power is measured by what you can keep in balance, not by what you can control. And thus, without announcing it, you become what many seek and few achieve, an effortless presence. Psychological mastery isn't a destination, it's a practice, with each day testing your silence, focus, and energy. And although your mind will continue to try to drag you down, you are now aware of it, understanding you don't need to flee from your emotions, just keep them in check with awareness. In this inner vigilance lies freedom, because no one can manipulate someone who knows themselves, nor deceive someone who observes their thoughts without identifying with them, being both the witness and author of your own chaos. If you ever doubt what you've achieved, remember, mastery isn't about ceasing to feel, but not being possessed by what you feel, having crossed the threshold that separates those who live asleep from those who wake up with intention. The true power isn't conquered outside, it's trained within, and your training has already begun, now knowing how to gain everything without feeling anything. But the question remains, are you prepared to live like this, to let go of the need to be understood, loved, or validated, to discover what you truly are when silence looks back at you? You ponder this before proceeding, because once you awaken to this level of consciousness, there's no turning back. And if you've understood what you've just heard, you reflect on it deeply.